The debate between whether you should use a TFSA or an RRSP will rage on for years beyond the relevance of this video, but the point of this video is to give you a couple of tools that you can look at critically to think, does it make sense to use the TFSA for my investments, or does it make sense to do the RRSP? Let's get started. So first, a quick recap of what the actual accounts are that we're talking about. I have other videos where I go further into this. An RRSP is a tax-deferred investment vehicle. What that means is if you put money in today, you will get a tax refund at tax season this year or April next year, and that money will grow tax-deferred. But you will absolutely pay tax on the way out when you take that money out of the RRSP. The TFSA, on the other hand, has no impact on your taxes today. It has certain limits, of course, how much you can put actually in there, but there's also no impact on your taxes when you pull money out of the TFSA down the road. So the debate becomes, do I get that refund now, or do I enjoy that tax-free income down the road? One interesting thing I've found in my 11 or 12 years in this industry is that the TFSA in particular is viewed very differently depending on the generation you find yourself in, and I'll explain why I say that. In 2009, when the TFSA came into existence, many of my viewers, especially if you're 70 plus, you were at the very, very tail end of your career, possibly even retired. In the case of my parents, for example, they were retired just barely in 2009. So the TFSA is little more than a glorified savings account to them because it didn't have time to really show what it can do for their financial picture. Whereas for myself as a millennial, it's not a glorified savings account, it's just glorious. I love TFSAs, and if I could theoretically get to retirement and have 100% of my investable assets in a TFSA, that would be awesome. Probably doesn't make practical sense, and you'll see why in a second, and it won't be the way it works out for me. But for the millennials and younger, they're absolutely glorious. And I find that when my clients come to me that are Gen X, so that's you that are kind of in your mid to late 40s right now, maybe early 50s, it's either one extreme or the other. You're either fully invested, like you've no room left in your TFSA, you've been investing since day one, or you never got it and you have nothing in there. There's no judgment on which position you're on, but I have yet to see a Gen X client come to me that was in between. It's always an extreme. So how do you actually pick TFSA versus RRSP? I'm going to give you a quick kind of general rule, and then I'm going to jump into my computer and show you a couple websites that'll help you kind of figure this out. So the general rule is if your marginal tax rate today is 10% or greater than the average tax rate you're expecting in the future, you should absolutely be using an RRSP. That sounds like a very complicated general rule, which is why we're going to jump into the computer in a second and I'll show you these graphs. But here's the kind of rationale behind it. If you're a low income earner and you anticipate to be a low income earner in retirement, you will be getting a low tax refund for a low tax bill down the road. That will be very close to breaking even. You might as well just do the TFSA. If you're an extremely high or even just a high income earner and you see that you'll have lower expenses in the future, you're creating a gap and you're creating an advantage. If you can generate a 40% refund now and only be paying 10, 15%, maybe 20% in the future, you're creating wealth for yourself, especially if you're investing the refund that you're getting. So while my old general rule, and another good one to follow, is don't bother with an RRSP until your marginal tax rate starts with the number 4, so 40% or higher. My new one is at least have a 10% gap between your average tax rate of the future and your marginal tax rate today. So let's look at what that means. So to help shed light on finding both the marginal tax rate today and the average tax rate tomorrow, there are two websites that I want to show you. The first is taxtips.ca, and here on this website you can actually find this beautiful chart, and this is set to Ontario, by the way. I had to pick a province for the video. You can find this beautiful chart that has all of your provincial and federal tax rates combined. So as an example, if you were in Ontario earning $100,000 exactly, you would find yourself in the 31.48% marginal tax rate. But how do we find our average tax rate? For that, I go to a different website. It's Ernst & Young, or EY, taxcalculators.com, and you can actually just punch in a value. So let's say you were in Ontario and you were earning around or that $100,000 figure, but you're only spending about $5,000 a month on things that will actually continue being spent in retirement. So by the time you retire, hopefully your mortgage is gone, hopefully your car loans are gone, things like that, but you're spending $5,000 on other things. That's about, what's exactly, $60,000 per year. So as a very rough kind of general way to look at this, let's just say that's about $75,000 of income, as there will be some taxation when you get to retirement, and you need to make sure you kind of factor that in. So if we're assuming $75,000 of tax in the future, but this is today's dollars, we'll talk about that relationship in a second, that means your average tax, which is this column right here, will be 18.76%. Your marginal today is 31.48. Your average down the road is 18.76. You have met the criteria of having that big of a gap. It probably makes sense to do an RRSP for you, especially if you invest that refund into a TFSA. That'll get you out way ahead. Or especially if you're in a couple, because you'll have income splitting possibilities down the road, which will make this even more advantageous. But Chad, stop. What about inflation? I can almost hear you coming through the screen with that question, and it's an incredibly important question. But here's the thing about inflation. Not only will the money that you're spending on goods go up with inflation, so will the brackets. And what's so nice about taxtips.ca is they actually give you both the 2023 and the 2024 brackets. So for you, Mr. $100,000 income earner in Ontario, earning a 31.48% marginal tax rate, you can actually see that last year, if you were earning $100,000, you were in a different rate. These rates, bracket is what I meant to say there, these brackets inflate along the way with your spending. So if you currently are making 100 grand, but you're currently spending around 5,000, which means that your gross income will be somewhere between 70 and 80,000, you will only be in these first three marginal brackets. And while your spending inflates over time, simultaneously these brackets will inflate over time. So it is reasonable, not guaranteed. I'm aware that there are some shortcuts being made here, but it is reasonable to assume that you will still be only in the bottom three marginal tax brackets, which means it is reasonable to assume that this average tax rate that you'd be looking at today will be somewhat similar to what you'll actually be looking at down the line, which is why I say take a look at what your average tax rate would be in today's dollars or in today's brackets, and if that gap is a 10% gap or larger, it probably makes sense to do the RRSP. There were a lot of numbers in this example and a lot of assumptions that have to be made. So if it's time for you to look at your financial plan and start looking at some of these assumptions for your future, there'll be a link in the description down below that'll come directly to me. Until next time, keep planning.